Oh, does this have the name? No, it said I said no because I could go get time of freedom of speech.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. Yeah, you would respond after what we do today. We'll talk about that.
Did you see the picture we posted on Twitter?
Yeah.
Did you see my face?
Sorry. I'm so sorry.
I was like,
Oh no, I didn't like it. What?
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Hey guys, look, hey, just as a heads up, and we generally do this period. I do have the live stream running, so just kind of keep that in mind. Microphone does pick up quite a bit. Just a heads up, always like to give you a friendly reminder of that. Today, and I think to a big extent tomorrow, is all about kind of getting to a spot where whatever the rest of the week brings us, I feel good about where we're stopping. I'm not going to go so far as to guarantee that Wednesday is a stay home, but if I were a betting man, if I were in Vegas with a handful of chips, I would put it on close on Wednesday. So that's just my thought on it. And guys, I've sort of been telling my students this all day. When Wednesday rolls around, that's going to be weather to respect. If it gets as cold as they have forecasted, which is we're right in that like -35 wind chill area. I don't know about that. That's the kind of weather. If you go out without gloves or you've got just a sock hat on, and the rest of your face is exposed, that's a frostbite in a matter of minutes. So don't play around. That's going to be a day to stay home and stay under a blanket and pray that your pipes don't freeze. Leave it around. The cabinet's open, ready to go. So, and then Thursday is I think it's going to be still cold in the morning. Probably a delay day. We'll see what happens then. I think we'll be here Friday. And of course, that's supposed to be almost 50 by the weekend. So. It's out of control, but what I want to do today, Friday we had the delay, which didn't really affect you guys, but I kind of kept you on the same schedule. We walked through that journal response together, and then gave you some time to finish up if you needed the document activity. What I want to do today is a little bit in the way of some notes. Once you're done with the journal, you're not going to need your Chromebook for the rest of class, and I will, in fact, ask you to actually close that so that you can pay attention up here. Some of what we go through today is going to inevitably be review over some of what we covered last week. And I don't think it's a bad thing. But then I want to make sure that we had talked about the United States and the war itself. I mean, there's not a ton to talk about because we're only actually boots on the ground for about 9 months of the actual war. I want to show you some photographs, a couple of video footage, because we are at a point where we've kind of got some early movie technology. It's like the old hand-reel cameras. But especially when we review the German policy with the submarines, we've got a lot of footage of that actually going down, which is kind of a wild thing to see. So I want to make sure that I share that with you. All right. So if you need to, finish up your journal. Otherwise, close them down and just worry about answering the questions.
Why'd you buy these?
I like to try to do something nice. Yeah, right.
Make a good wife someday. Make a good wife someday.
Hey, when I cook, I cook.
Oh my God!
It's not working for me today. Taylor, would you mind turning the knob on that set of blinds so we can get a little bit more light in here? Okay. All right, let's get rolling on this. It's that help, Taylor? Okay, so first actual, I think, couple of questions. You could probably start answering some of those even right now, but just to make sure that we're all good and clear on this stuff. Question number one is asking for you, just as a review, to talk a little bit about, answer a little bit about why the war itself got started. Not the United States getting involved in the war, but why the war itself got started in 1914. So based off of what we did last week, I mean, I'm hoping that you watched the short little 3-minute Klein video on the beginning of World War I. But can somebody give me at least one reason for why just simply the war itself got started? One reason. What do you remember, Gabby?
Wasn't there like a country? Wasn't it Germany that tried to take over?
Okay, so we had we did have some fighting going on between other countries, and Germany was definitely the heavy, as they say. They were the power. They had the biggest, best, strongest army at that time. They were definitely a part of this. Bo? There was an assassination, and that was easily the final straw that brought all of this together. And the guy in question, who is going to get killed here, some of you may be, if you're a music fan, may recognize the name Franz Ferdinand. That marker is literally full. I've got to have a marker around here somewhere, though, right? There we go. Okay, so Franz Ferdinand is the guy who gets shot. Talk about a poor decision. Franz Ferdinand is not the king. He is the Archduke, which is a fancy way of saying prince. And he belongs to a country which today is actually two separate countries. But at the time they were combined, and that's Austria-Hungary. They were very close with Germany. Okay? Germans and Austrians in particular are kind of like cousins. You know, they're all part of the same family. So at this time, Austria-Hungary was the power, unquestionably the power throughout Eastern Europe. And they had been using that power to take over certain areas, including countries at that time known as Serbia and Bosnia. So they, the Ferdinand family decided to take a little vacation to a town called Sarajevo, still a big city today. And Sarajevo is the capital of Serbia at that time. It's worth noting at this point in the story that people in Serbia absolutely despise the Austria-Hungarians. They hate the royals. They hate this guy. So let's vacation there. Okay? They take his wife, he takes his family, all his kids. They go to Sarajevo for a little vacation, and while they're there, he decides to get into a car with his wife. Let's put the top down, and let's go for a cruise through the streets of Sarajevo. Right? None of this sounds like a smart decision. While they're driving, a bomb goes off. Now, nowhere really near the car, but it's enough to kind of cause chaos and get everybody running and screaming. And in the middle of that chaos, a little guy named Gavrilo Princip, who was part of a sort of a domestic terrorism group in Serbia called the Black Hand, ran up to the Archduke's car, and from point blank, several shots into the Archduke and into his wife, killed them both, and they were dead. Okay, so this brings us to, I think, probably the other big reason why this war begins, and that is the alliances that were in place at this time. Okay, so Austria-Hungary was allied with Germany, and Serbia was allied with Russia. And so when this Serbian nationalist kills the Archduke, Austria declares war on Serbia, which means that Russia has to do what? On Austria. And when Russia declares war on Austria, that means that Germany has to. And then because the British and the French are allied with the Russians, this means that they have to declare war on You see how this, yeah, and that's how this all breaks down. It's just bing, bang, boom, bang, bing, you know, alliance, 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 alliance. I don't think the French could have cared less about this fella getting shot. That's pretty far away for the French. But they were in an alliance with the Russians, so they didn't have a choice. And now here we go. You know, the war has begun. All right, so now that the war is going, there is a question as to whether or not the United States will get in to this war. And of course, I think we know what the answer to that question is going to be. That's an adamant no. All right, and a big reason for that, here we get into question 2, is because the United States, between the years 1914 and 1916, is overcome with an attitude of isolationism. Right? So again, we talked about this. Somebody jog our memories here. When we say that a country is isolationist, what are we talking about? Jesse, go for it. Yeah, they're putting the focus on themselves. They're not really concerned with the affairs of other nations. Now, I don't want you to think that we are putting ourselves into an island here. You know, we are trading with the British. We trade with the French. For that matter, we trade with the Germans. We have a trade relationship with a lot of countries. But, you know, when it comes to a war, we're definitely not interested really in getting involved over there. And just to kind of give you some examples here, Woodrow Wilson. And of those two pictures, which one is Woodrow Wilson? Yeah, left, right? So he's going to be president number 28. And we'll talk a little bit more about how he got elected here, probably towards the end of class. But Woodrow Wilson is, he's a smart guy. He was, former president of an Ivy League university. He's a smart fellow. And I think this is somewhat ironic, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but Woodrow Wilson is looking at the United States and he says, look, we got a lot of immigrants here. And more than that, we got a lot of German immigrants here. You know, if we go to war with Germany, this could cause some real problems for folks living here in the United States. You know, there's a lot of fear at play here, and that fear is keeping us out of the war. I think another way to sum this up, and this is a name I would never expect you to know for anything, but a guy named Walter Page, who was the U.S. ambassador to Britain, and this is his quote, "I thank heaven for many things. First, the Atlantic Ocean." What do you think he means by that?
Separation between.
Exactly. You know, thank goodness we have the Atlantic to keep us away from what's going on over there. Boy, I'm glad we don't have to deal with that. Now, I want to say this though. Not every American sits this out. Now, we may not have American soldiers over there, but we do have Americans that are looking to get involved. And one of them is the gentleman over here to the right, and that's a guy named Herbert Hoover. Now, Herbert Hoover's a name that we're not by any means done with. And eventually Herbert Hoover is going to become what? President of the United States. All right? President number 31. Now, Hoover is, he's not a politician. He's not a politician. Hoover is, at this point, he's, just a businessman who happens to operate kind of like a mining company. He's from Iowa, and his mining company's out there kind of in the Midwestern Plains states. And, he's made a nice living for himself. And when this war begins, he's not necessarily concerned with the U.S. sending soldiers over. But he does have a lot of concern for the people, the innocents in Europe that are dealing with war. And so he puts together, uses a lot of his own money, puts together a relief organization, a Red Cross type of thing. And basically they go over right at the beginning of the war, all the way through to the end. And they bring food, they bring other necessary supplies, clothing, water, these staple things to those folks living over in Europe. Guys, think about this. We talked about the reality of trench warfare last week. All right, there are hundreds and hundreds of miles of these trenches that are going through France by itself. And then in the area between the trenches, huge craters where bombs have exploded. the chemical warfare coming down, that can't be good for your crops. I mean, France is just destroyed by this war. And Hoover's and his group are over there to try to at least help the people of France eat. He does a lot of good. He comes out of this war as not just an American hero. He's sort of an international hero. And, you know, maybe rightfully so. Does a lot of good. Does a lot of good. But understand this. He is the exception rather than the norm. The norm, I think, can be summed up in this political cartoon. All right, what are some of the things that you notice in the cartoon? Okay, we got Europe in the background. You see the letters? Yes. It appears that it is on fire. What else do we notice? Yeah, so you got the eagle's wings are protectively covering the United States. Notice the direction his head is turned towards that burning heat that is Europe. Kind of like, you know, we're going to stay over here, let them kill themselves, but we don't want anything to do with it. I'm telling you, fear is a big motivator for keeping us out of this particular conflict, right? Okay, so moving on to question 4 now. A couple of the things that did eventually push us in. All right, if you had to identify, I mean, the answer to number 4, the 2 factors that pushed us in. Again, this is a review from last week. Somebody give me one of those big factors that eventually pushed the U.S. into this war. What do I remember? Good. Okay. What specifically destroyed the ship? German what? Submarines. Very good. Very good. Right. All right. So German submarines. That's definitely part of it. What's the other one? Tim? Yeah. All right. So those are the two big factors here. Let's just talk a little bit about the what's going on here, and then I want to show you this very short clip. A buddy of mine who teaches in Massachusetts, he's in this clip and just does a great job of reviewing, you know, all of this that's going into the United States getting into the war. And it's important at this point, guys. I want to stress to you, nobody wants in this war from the United States. Woodrow Wilson is very concerned with the impact of this war on the country, on German immigrants who live here. We're going to really see that attitude start to change. And I've got your 2 answers right here, okay? Now, let's kind of trace this out with a little bit more detail. I feel like we know the basics. Let's get a little bit more detail into this, all right? After the Lusitania is sunk in May of 1950, you remember that document, right, from last week? All right, you know, we had the New York Times. Remember what the New York Times said the United States should do in response to that boat getting sunk? This was document A. Huh? Definitely don't travel, but I think they were a little ticked. I don't know if you guys picked up on that. All right, the New York Times was basically saying, we got to do something about this. We can't let them do this. And so we are going to see President Wilson issue a warning to Germany. You better cut this out, or we're going to have to do something about it. And I can promise you, Germany does not want the U.S. in this war. So we are going to see, for about 2 years, Germany stop their subs from sinking American ships. Now, they'll still go after British ships, but they don't sink American ships anymore. That calms things enough that it's easy to keep us out of the war. All right, March of 1917, they decide, you know what? If the U.S. was going to do something about it, they would have done it already. Let's go. And so in March, we see this sort of unrestricted, unencumbered German submarine warfare. They sink every single ship going to Britain. If they can, they're going to sink it. We don't care if you're American, British, whatever. We're going to sink it. In March alone, they sink 3 U.S. ships, killing 15 Americans. That's obviously going to be a big part of this. Okay? And then on top of that, you've got, of course, the telegram. By April 2nd, we saw this speech. This was document C, where Woodrow Wilson goes to Congress and says, you know, neutrality is no longer an option. We've got to go to war. All right, so just some visuals here. There is, of course, the infamous telegram. What does Mexico get out of this deal? Yeah, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. All they have to do is invade the U.S. and keep us busy. Does Mexico ever get this telegram, by the way? Why not? Who does? The British. The British intercepted, so then they bring it to us. I love old political cartoons. I love old political cartoons for the message, but also for the way that they so stereotype the people featured. You know, everyone from Mexico must obviously be wearing a sombrero. You know, but yeah, and then you kind of got the stereotypical German here. But notice that's April of 1917. So that's pretty wild visual there. I want to show you this too. This is one of those 3 U.S. ships that the Germans sent. What do you notice about this picture? There's something big that I would encourage you to notice about this picture. It's taken from the submarine, which means that the Germans torpedoed the ship, then came to the surface, climbed out so they could watch it sink. What is that? What do you take from that? Pretty rough. Pretty rough. All right. So it certainly sends this message that the Germans don't feel bad about this. They don't really care what the U.S. is going to do. And as part of this clip, that's one of the many reasons I want to show it. They've actually got some of the film reel footage taken from on top of these German submarines. All right. So let's take a look at that real quick. And this one, again, is going to be sort of a wrap-up review. And then I'm going to say just a few quick words about the United States actually in the war, and then that would kind of wrap things up. But just for a second here, pay attention to the video clip.
So America watches World War I from 1914 to April of 1917. And people ask why. Why doesn't America get involved immediately? And American politicians are petrified of being drawn into foreign war and fighting for foreign ends.
Remember, the United States is a nation of immigrants. People came here to avoid war in Europe.
The Americans had, from the very beginning, an official policy of neutrality. But neutrality never meant indifference or apathy.
Even though we're saying we don't want to involve ourselves, we certainly were sympathetic in trying to help aid that cause in ways that the Germans saw as being destructive to their war aims. So in all those ways, the Wilson administration is walking the tightrope.
Woodrow Wilson, after all, runs for re-election in 1916 on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." And yet within a year after winning that election, that very same president is declaring war on the Germans.
Ultimately, the triggering event that brings us into the war is Germany's decision to revive unrestricted submarine warfare.
Added to that, the Germans had managed in a particularly ham-fisted way to try and recruit the Mexicans to come in on their side if America entered the war. And they had offered to return to the Mexicans all the lands they had lost in the 19th century to the U.S., Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. The Germans sent this offer to the Mexicans by telegram, Western Union, of all things. Only what they didn't realize was the Western Union office was in London. And so the British captured the telegram and promptly sent it to the U.S. and released it in public. And that angered the American people so much that, combined with unrestricted submarine warfare, Wilson felt that he had to take the U.S. into the war against Germany and Austro-Hungary. When America...
Okay. So that kind of reviews, what's going on there. And now, the U.S. in the war. But, and I mentioned this last week, one significant problem that we've got to deal with before we can actually get involved in this particular fight. Anybody remember what that large? Yeah, we don't really have an army. We got a little one, but what were they preoccupied with? Yeah, hunting a Mexican bandit named Pancho Villa. So now we're in a war, oh gosh, we better get, soldiers. And then there's, the question of who's going to command the army? Like, we need a commander. So they grabbed this guy, John Pershing. His nickname is Blackjack. And he's been in the army for a while, but this is the guy who's been trying to capture that Mexican man. So now we really just abandoned that whole thing. Pancho Villa is never captured. We take all those troops, we take Blackjack here, we pull him back east, and now his job is, hey, we need an army, go build one. No, that's exactly what he does. He builds what he calls the AEF, the American Expeditionary Force. And I had a little brief run-in with the AEF in a place I never expected to, the world of Harry Potter. I'm admittedly, a little bit of a Harry Potter nerd. Got no trouble admitting that. My son has become the same, and we enjoyed the Fantastic Beasts movie. That random American guy who's trying to open a bakery. Have you seen that movie? So remember, he says at one point that he's been gone for the past several years, serving in the AEF. Okay, so he was part of what we're talking about here. So this is not the American Army. This is a completely brand new outfit. It's not until after World War I that we actually see the buildup of a professional army. And this is sort of the root of it, okay? Orders there, a draft to be taking place. So, we're going to forcibly build this unit, bring in all these soldiers. But again, remember that these are, in most cases, individuals who have never fought. Pershing knows what it's like over there. We got to get these guys ready, not just to shoot a rifle. All right, we got to get them ready to deal with the noise of artillery fire, what it's going to be like to charge over trenches and try to capture the other trench. We got to get them ready for the realities of war, and that ends up taking a really long time. We don't have American troops in Europe until January. Folks, we're talking about like 8 months of training here before we get American troops over in Europe. In the meantime, the Germans kick their effort into overdrive and try to finish off the British and finish off the French so that, hopefully they can end this before the United States ever shows up. And boy, they get close. But not close enough. Okay? January of 1918, here comes the U.S., and we are coming strong. 850,000 American troops over to Europe. They are fresh. They are, they're not tired. They are well armed. They are well supplied, and they're going up against the German army that has been fighting trench warfare for 4 years. By November, the war is over. By November, the war is over. And there's a story that's told when the Germans eventually surrender. They actually end up surrendering to the French, of all people. There used to be an old joke that if you went to Google and typed in French military victories, it would actually, sometimes it'll say, did you mean? It would say, did you mean French military defeats? And French are not known for their fierceness in battle. But the Germans surrendered to the French. You guys understand this. France has endured 4 years of having their country ripped apart through trench warfare. By the end of World War I, France has lost 1/3 of its population. 1/3 of its population. To say that they're a little ticked is putting it mildly. And so in an effort to embarrass the Germans, they forced the German high command onto the caboose of an old bombed-out train, and they just cram them in there on this little tight table. You can find pictures of it. They're all just crammed in. And they make them sign this armistice, the ceasefire. Okay? Signed on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. Why is that date significant? It's going to be known as Armistice Day until they change the name to Veterans Day. That's why Veterans Day is on November 11th. Now, what I think is, and I don't know if I want to say this is a great story, but in World War II, Hitler marched the Nazis into France and easily defeated the French army. And when it came time for the French to surrender to the Germans, guess what Hitler did? He found that train car. He found the actual train car and had it shuttled up to Paris. And when it got there, he crammed the French generals into the same train car and made them sign their surrender there. A little stick it to you. Again, I don't know that I love that story because Adolf Hitler's a bit of a turd, put it mildly. But it's just it's somewhat new. So this is a big moment for us, and I'll tell you the really big thing out of this is that we're about the only country that comes out of this feeling pretty good. I mean, we've had some casualties, but not nearly as much as everybody else. There has been no touch of this war on the United States at all. At all. We come out of this in really good shape. We come out of this as the global power. This is the moment where we really take our place as a big boy country, I think, where everyone has to respect us. This is a big moment for the United States. Now, what toll does it play here? As a means of finishing this up, there is one last little bit of discussion that I'd like to say something about. I don't know that the United States comes out of this, stainless. I think that there's a larger impact of this war that takes place inside the United States. And I wanted to say just something about that just real quick here. Okay, if you flip it over to the paper over to the back, there's a couple of vocab terms that I'm asking you to know. But they all sort of revolve around this one question. All right, we talked about fear a lot over the past couple of days. Fear was something that kept us out of the war. But I think once we're in the war, I think the fear remains. I just think it becomes a different kind of fear. I wanted to read you something that Woodrow Wilson said. Now, I'll remind you again, one of the reasons Woodrow Wilson wanted us out of the war was that he was afraid of the war's impact on German immigrants living here. Now, what I'm going to read you comes from April of 1917. So this is him giving his speech to Congress, saying, we need to go to war. He said, quote, there are millions of men and women of German birth and native sympathy who live amongst us. If there should be disloyalty, it will be dealt with a firm hand of repression. See the attitude change there? He's gone from, I'm really worried about German immigrants, to, if you happen to be of German descent, even if it's dad who came over, or grandpa, you had better watch your step And you had better watch what you say, because if it sounds like there is even a whiff of disloyalty, it will be met with the firm hand of repression. Okay, that's an attitude. And that attitude is called nativism. It's a belief in the need to protect so-called natives, American natives, from the impact of them. Now, when I say natives, I'm not talking about Native Americans. That's not the native that these folks are talking about. The natives that they're talking about are Americans who are known as WASPs, which, by the way, is an acronym. If you want to take a guess as to what each letter means, hold on, one at a time. That's correct. Now, here's where it starts to get, I think, kind of different. That's a good guess. If anybody gets this, I may just, A for the rest of it. Oh, wait, you're going to look it up. And we're talking about a description of a type of person.
Authentic.
Arrogant, maybe. All right, I don't think we're going to get this. All right. White.
No.
Hey, stop. Anglo. Saxon. Protestant.
You only gave me 5 more seconds.
Right? It was right there on the tip of your tongue. Right? So, white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant. Now, what on earth does that mean? Well, the white part of it, I think we get. Okay, Anglo-Saxon is a description for people that come from a certain European country called Great Britain. And Protestant is what? No. It's Christian, not Catholic, right? So this, yeah. I mean, and that is a key divider here. Okay, this is a description used for the so-called Native American, someone who is white, who has got lineage from Great Britain, and who is Protestant, Christian, not Catholic, not Catholic. Right? And that's who, according to this attitude, that is who we need to protect. And we see this come through in 2 laws that are pretty scary. And I would encourage you to think back to our journal prompt. Okay, we have these freedoms that we kind of take for granted. Are those freedoms all the time? Or are there times when we should limit those freedoms that we have? Now, that's rhetorical right now. You had a journal prompt here. But we see this kind of play out. Here's our first one, 1917. The Espionage Act. Espionage is another word for what? Spying. So it says, define espionage. You're spying. And what this law allowed, we've got some propaganda here. Get a lot of that in the next couple of weeks. That the U.S. government could ban any newspaper, any magazine that spoke in any way, shape, or form ill of the American government. And if you, as an American, were seen to be, quote, conspiring, whatever that means, then you could be faced with a $10,000 fine, 20 years in jail. $10,000 is a lot of money now. In 1917, oh yeah. All right. So, not everybody's enthused with the American government right now. Whether it's Republican or Democrat, I feel like everybody's just generally unhappy, right? So if you were to stand up and say, Congress sucks, well, you might be given a $10,000 fine and face 20 years in jail. Right? But see, that's the way this works. We have free speech, but the idea here is we're in war. We need to limit. We need unity. We need strength. Okay? And then 1 year later, we see the Sedition Act that's going to be passed. Sedition that's the actual action of saying something negative. Espionage is spying. Sedition is actually saying Congress sucks. Okay? All right, and here we see it making it a federal offense. I love the words they use here. Disloyal language, profane language, scurrilous, whatever that means, or abusive language about the government. You say something bad about the government, you have committed a federal offense. So how does fear impact the U.S.? Here you go. This is the ugly head of fear, but it's a very different fear. And boy, did we go a long way from Woodrow Wilson being concerned about German immigrants to now. Keep your mouth shut, Bo. You could make that argument. You could make that argument. Now, I've answered all the questions on here, I think. Are there any of these that you'd like me to go over again? Which one? Number one, too much primary causes the war began. I've got those kind of listed over here. This cat gets assassinated. The alliance structures that have been set up. Yeah. Taylor.
What did you define as
Sedition? Remember, that's the act of saying something bad about something negative about the government. Any others that you wanted me to go over again? Yeah. Yeah. Well, sedition, I don't know if you can tell from the poster, but the government's going through your mail. So if you wrote a note to Aunt Susie, hey, can you believe what Wilson is doing? Yeah, it sucks. All right, hey, before you wrap up, you don't have to write anything, but I said I was going to do this from time to time. Just do like a quick president's review. So you don't have to do anything necessarily except for listen. But let's do that real quick, kind of where we are. You already ought to have McKinley and Roosevelt. You should know those guys by now. Here's McKinley. What happens to McKinley again? Gets shot. Teddy becomes president. We talked about him. Once Teddy Roosevelt leaves office, he handpicks the guy who's going to come after him, and it's his good buddy, William Howard Taft. Now, Taft stands out generally for two reasons, one more than other. The one that everybody seems to remember is that he was our largest president. I mean, literally, like they had to bring in a brand new, larger bathtub for him. He's a big guy. The way that I think he should be remembered is that he never wanted to be president. He didn't want to be this. Teddy Roosevelt conned him into it. All he ever wanted was to become Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So after he served his one term as president, guess what? He became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Way to go, buddy. All right. Now, he's going to move out. Woodrow Wilson's going to move in. We've talked about him. Wilson is he's an interesting guy. He is, and I'm just going to level with you. He is 100% a pretty hardcore racist. And I mean, there's just no way around it. He is the first president to ever watch a movie in the White House. That's kind of cool. Bad part is, though, is the movie is called The Birth of a Nation. And in the movie, the heroes are the KKK. We're actually going to watch a little bit of that next week. It's a trip, let me tell you. All right. Now, Wilson is going to he's going to be president all the way to 1920. What's crazy, though, is that in 1919, he suffers a massive, massive stroke. I mean, it's bad enough that he is out of commission. He's bedridden. His wife basically ran the White House for the last several months of his presidency. All right? Then, after Wilson is out of there, we have this guy, one of easily the worst people we've ever had be president. All right, Warren Harding. Warren Harding, his slogan was, "I will be a return to normalcy." He's putting himself out there as the normal guy. Vote for me. But Americans were so tired of war that they were digging this. So they let him in. And remember, this guy's president during Prohibition. He really didn't care. He actually had a special tunnel installed for the White House where he could have liquor brought in every day. And apparently, according to rumors, it was more than just liquor coming in. He was a fan of the ladies. So he ends up dying of a massive heart attack, which elevates Calvin Coolidge to the White House. And I got a great Calvin Coolidge story. I got two good Calvin Coolidge stories. Number one, when he finds out that Harding has died, he is in a Vermont maple syrup shack, can't make this up, with his dad. And they come and find him and say, "Harding's dead, you're president." His dad is a justice of the peace, and he actually gives Coolidge the oath in a maple syrup shack. Wild stuff. Now, Coolidge was known for being a real quiet guy. They called him Silent Cal. And at a White House party, two reporters were going back and forth, and the one made the other a bet. He said, "Look, I'll bet I can get the president to say more than 2 words. Watch me." They made a bet. He walked up to the president. He said, "Mr. President, I'm sorry, excuse me. I made a bet with my friend here that I can get you to say more than 2 words." I think Coolidge replied with. He replied with, "You lose." I love that. That's kind of a fun little, sarcasm that I dig. All right. So then Coolidge is going to move out. He's done, and he's going to be replaced with this hero guy, the hero of World War I, and that's our old buddy Herbert Hoover. All right. He's going to be president. He gets elected in 1928. Americans are feeling good. That's usually about the time when the bottom drops out. And in this case, it's going to be a pretty hard fall. They call it the Great Depression. So, Hoover is not seen as a hero anymore. All right. So, just want to do a quick review. If you've got your questions done, make sure you turn these in before you go. If not, you still got about 5 minutes if you need to finish any of them up. Thank you for your attention today, guys. I really appreciate it. And according to the story,
I don't want to go to English.
that was Governor Moore. He wasn't afraid. You don't want to answer. That's fine. Yeah, I mean, that's doesn't count. Let's do it. Hey, what's up, bro? Well, I would rather send you. Yeah, so I'll do that now. Hey, when we for as long as you're in that thing, if we do something like this, remind me or something like that. Prior.
Is it fine? Can I go to the restroom?